All right, so I've got a minty meter. Do you got it? I guess I have to log out virtually though, because I'm.
Yes.
Well.
Glad I made this one.
Yeah, me too. If you had to pick and choose, this is the one.
3 for 4.
There you go.
I'll give you a real test of my.
Sorry, I won't leave you quite yet.
Okay. This is, I don't even know my own password.
Is that the song?
I mean, it's a good one. I like that. It may be the most controversial.
I have to challenge the premise.
It's not even funny. So. There. Secondly, no, don't do that. Now, what about the answer on this
So
question?
that's what
But June 3:30, I think we need. You said you can't do it. We need to fix the hard times. You know what? I think I'll just go ahead. And I'll just say table it. So you're saying the same thing he did.
Darn multi-factor.
I know, right? Supposed to be 2 factors, turns into 3.
Yeah, turns them 4. Like.
I know.
I was just joking the first.
Yeah, that was really intense there.
Yeah. All right, we're in.
Okay, let's see here. So then how do I on, it's been a while since I've worked with a,
Okay.
So
And that's the one you wanted to show?
yeah.
Okay.
So am I live on this?
You are, but the only thing that's being shown or recorded right now is the slideshow. Not
So how do I get,
Gotcha.
how do I switch between it? Because I'm only do this for a few minutes and then I'm going back to the PowerPoint.
Sure. So if you hit present over there in the top right, that should, sorry, it's an extended desktop kind of thing. Might want to use the mouse. Oh. There you are, somewhere in the bottom here.
Yeah.
All right, let me, what if I give it a swing?
Okay, so
Oh, there you go. Got it. That's interesting. Didn't expect that to happen.
So should I stop presenting on the other?
It looks like this doesn't have a
Oh, you know what?
screen thing.
Can I
so-
stop the share and then share from this screen?
Yeah, actually, you could do that. Mhm.
Just so I know what I'm doing. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna stop share. I'm gonna go share screen. We're gonna do Mentimeter,
Mhm.
right?
Yep. And then share.
Share
Boom.
and then present.
Yes. And there you go. It'll
Got it.
appear right there, but you just won't see it in person.
Oh wait, but how do I get it up here for these people?
Got it. All right, so let's do it this way.
Stop share.
Stop share. We're just gonna share screen 2 over there. That way that still gets recorded. And what we're gonna do for this,
More people for the people here.
gotcha.
Oh, this is where it's at. So then when I'm done with this, I can just bring it over.
Yeah, so you could just Alt Tab and go right back into your presentation. So at this point, if you just hit Alt Tab, it'll go into your Mentimeter, hit Alt Tab again, and it'll go back into your
Let me just
presentation.
quickly just make sure I can navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just make sure I set it up right for you. Okay, there you go. So like right now you are in your presentation.
Okay, so go.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I can do this.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
If you need any help, you push that computer button, I will be in. I will say take it directly to me. I know, right?
Okay.
That'll send it directly to me in the office.
Names over here though, anybody also, right?
I'm sorry?
The woman. that was named.
She's also,
What's that?
We know the answers, right? But
You don't know the answer?
I could say.
No.
Somebody
Yeah.
So we could just have her.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. Gracias. Okay.
Any other questions for me?
You're good.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate your help. Good man.
Have a good one.
I hope everyone's enjoying your lunch. Just as you feel free, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. So feel free for you to continue to enjoy. We will be doing a couple questions via Mentimeter. But enjoy for now, and we'll do it in just a second. But I want to get that teed up for you.
No.
I am on a microphone.
Okay, so this is my thing. And did you get a chance to look at gave you a piece of paper? You haven't? Okay, is it okay? I mean, minor change, but very much. I want to arbitrarily. Boy. Oh,
Start a mind class. So I have to get mine. I didn't. So they actually asked for the rest of it. They got it, yeah. It's apparently in industrial formula, there has to be a little, we're making it for like 500, but you probably simplify. Yeah, it seems like.
what is? Yeah. Oh, they're probably taking it back.
It's like, you can look from it. If I start off with that. I don't know. All right, John, you ready?
Just cutting. Or you think it's?
I'll let you know. Goodbye.
But then when you're ready to do it.
I'll start. They were saying it to him, like, I don't know if he actually has it addressed yet, but like, there was a conversation, there was an agreement made. Yeah.
All right, 2:15.
We would like to welcome each and every one of you to this special discussion. We are welcome you to the swamp. We're taking you to DC, into the heart of it, where a lot of it, well, I almost want to say excitement is taking place, but depending on your version of excitement. But it's great to have you here. Thanks for taking a few minutes during lunch to come and join us, which we hope will be a very lively and interesting discussion. And the title of our session is is the United States retreating from WASH? And we're excited to kind of delve into various aspects of that issue. To get us started, we do have a few Mentimeter questions. So if you have the ability, I might have to throw up another slide real quickly. Cool.
You need a bigger QR.
There we go. Hopefully that's a little bigger QR code. So we're just going to walk through 3 quick questions, kind of see where we're at as an audience. So I'll give everyone a moment to grab that code.
And if you need anybody to move their head, we will.
Access okay? Don't need to get lower. A little lower. Lower down.
That's it. All right.
All right.
Get over here.
Well, let's dive into this. So the first question we offered the group is, how much money did USAID spend on WASH last year? Oh, we're kind of getting a mixed bag of answers here. Well, this is going to be one of our first items of discussion, so I'm excited that we're digging right into this.
They're all wrong.
We'll give you yeah. It was a trick question. We'll give you 15 more seconds to quickly wrap that up, and then we'll dive into the next one. All right. The correct answer. How much money did the USAID spend on WASH last year? Oh, that's not it. I pushed a button I shouldn't have. There we go. We're back. Well, it was $475 million. So congratulations to the lucky 15. All right. When I push enter, this is what happens.
Your personal stuff.
All right. So next we're going to go to a raise your hand poll instead of going back to the Mentimeter. So for the continuing on with that is, how many of you have actually heard of the White House Action Plan on Global Water Security? If you have heard of it, raise your hand. Okay, it's helpful. Next quick poll question.
Wait. How many was that? Roughly, like 80%?
Yeah.
Half?
All right. Next question. I'm going to give you 3 options from very familiar, I've heard of it, to not familiar. This is, how familiar are you with the USAID Global Water Strategy? If you would say you are very familiar with it, raise your hand. Okay, a few brave souls. If you've heard of it, raise your hand. Okay, and if you're not familiar at all with it, raise your hand. Perfect. Okay, this is very helpful for us to understand as we dive into these discussions. So thank you for taking a moment. See if I can't. There we go.
Okay.
So, well, let's just maybe do quick introductions.
Are you going to hang up here to do the slides? Or do you do it backwards?
I'm going to see if I can do it from where.
Okay. Okay. This. Okay.
We can do it from this.
You're going to do it from there?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Exciting.
Okay, so I'm going to sit because that's what I want to do. So we didn't put up a slide. Maybe we should have thought of this. I didn't. With just our short bios, or just say who we are. Some of you know who we are, but I'll try to do that real quick. Now we'll run through and just do a little one sentence each, because I won't get your titles right if I try it myself. I'm John Sparks. I'm the Director of Advocacy at the Millennium Water Alliance. And the Millennium Water Alliance is basically the alliance that does advocacy and other things too. We're 20 members. We have research institutions, private companies, and mostly NGOs who are leading NGOs on implementing WASH in more than 100 countries. So that's MWA. I've been around doing this for 14 years. And then we are lucky to have Liz Marcy. Liz, say your thing.
Yep. So it is not the name that is in your program. I'm Liz Marcy. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy for WaterAid America, and me and my team oversee everything to do around foreign assistance issues and WASH. So that is our NICS area.
And you have Danielle Heiberg in it, and she works with us too.
There was a Mozambique trip. We had to cancel. It's a long story.
It's a lot. But Danielle's often here too. Anyway, please.
Christopher Lindsay with IAPMO. We're an industry association that represents the plumbing, water, and sanitation industry.
And I'm Luke Wilson. I'm the Deputy Director for the Center for Water Security and Cooperation. I'm a lawyer and we're a law-focused organization working in the US and around the world.
You're a lawyer?
That's right. Everyone be afraid. Be very afraid.
All right, so right away, first thing is WASH funding, as the name of this session says, or certainly implies, is under threat. What is happening and where do we go now? So we're going to try to take this in very quick chunks. Just so you know, where's the appropriation slide? You got that?
Yep.
Okay. So Water for the Poor Act, what was that? That was in 2005. Senator Paul Simon Water for the Poor Act was passed by Congress and signed into law. What did that do? That told USAID, Congress told USAID, you need to do water, sanitation, and hygiene programming. You have to do it to this level. These are the things we want you to be paying attention to. Because to be perfectly blunt, for years prior to that, USAID had kind of not prioritized WASH. Not at all, actually. So in 2005, that was the act. A few years later, they still weren't doing it quite to our satisfaction. So we got together with members of Congress and put together the Senator Paul Simon Water for the World Act, which basically amended the Water for the Poor Act to be more specific, said, no, USAID, you will do this, you will do that. You need to have a global strategy. You need to be transparent about the criteria you use for establishing priority countries in the world. You need to report to us. You need to involve NGOs and others in your strategy development. Things that they kind of hadn't been doing that much prior to that. So that's the Water for the World Act. So either way, we say Water for the Poor Act and Water for the World Act. The programs under that act are the water, sanitation, and hygiene programs. You hear about that's where the $475 million that Congress has appropriated each year for the last 3 years and was almost ready to approve for this year. That's where that money goes. That's the kind of programming that goes out through the missions around the world, especially in the high priority countries. So as you can see, historically, we've been going slowly up. So from 2015, a little under 400 million, 300, I think it was like then it was like 350, I think it was 300. Well, when I started this job, I think we were around 250 million, which was back in 2010. And then we kept going up slowly up. And then all of a sudden we're at this point right now in this administration. The problem has been every year the Congress decides the money, basically. Of course, they have to get a presidential signature on the final spending bill. But at the same time, the administration puts forward what they call the presidential budget request. You hear about that, the president is going, and usually that comes in February, March, or April. The president requests, and that is the request that says basically from the White House, from the Office of Management Budget, here's what we think the agencies and departments of the United States government need to spend. This is what we're asking Congress for. Every year for time immemorial, the administration, no matter which one it is, Democrat or Republican, asks for less than Congress puts in for water, sanitation, and hygiene. WASH is known in Washington as one of the things that the Congress kind of takes care of. And the administration, every administration knows that. So they always lowball their request number. Why do they ask for less than they know what Congress is going to offer? Because they have other priorities that are more contentious. Climate, family planning, a whole bunch of other issues that are a lot more difficult for them to get Congress to agree on. So they figure WASH is the safe thing. We know Congress is going to plus up the request, so we will ask for less. What's happened is they've gotten kind of used to that, and they also are starting to see that WASH has been doing well. Why don't we take some more money out of WASH than they've been getting from Congress before? And that's kind of what happened. So this time the administration went back on itself, its previous budget request, and asked for even less than they had the previous year before. Now, Congress has generally ignored that. Congress didn't pay attention to the number, but now they're starting to pay attention to the number. And that's sort of why we are where we are. Which, Liz, do you want to jump into this?
Yep. And so you can see on the lovely graphic behind us, and if you will recall, the House of Representatives is currently, I won't say in control because we yet have a speaker. They're working on that right now. But it is under Republican in the majority, and then the Senate is under Democrat. majority rule. So the two bills that include the funding for what we call bilateral wash or water for the world have already gone through their subcommittees. They haven't been passed into law. So let's be clear. We're at a decision-making point. Okay, we have two potential paths in front of us. One is level funding at 475 million. And I believe the other is a 31% cut to bilateral water sanitation and hygiene for USAID and for their partner organizations. And that comes down to $327 million. To be clear, that really does put us back, I believe, I think it's
It puts us back
2000.
about 15 years.
It's about, yeah.
Yeah.
We've had very high numbers over the years, and I wish this were a little bit longer timeline. You would actually see a pretty big rocket up. So where are we and why would the Senate do that?
Especially
Fun
since they are
stuff.
so friendly to foreign aid in general.
Yeah,
It's the
they
House
are.
that's usually the problem.
They are. And I will say, I think it's quite a testament to the advocacy on the House side that while the overall foreign assistance funding bill was cut by over 30%, one of the few accounts that was completely protected was WASH. So there is definitely a prioritization there. The Senate, however, moved in a different direction. Why? You guys remember the debt ceiling? If you don't, very healthy mentally for you. But there was a deal that was struck and that there would be spending limitations for this year. And so when it came to the Senate, they had to make some very difficult kind of trade-offs within each bill of who was going to win and who was going to lose. And WASH was by far the biggest loser. I think basic education was the only similar cut. Everything else was increased or maintained. And that was because they had to stay under that limit. It is also because there was a perception, which we have since corrected, that for some reason, WASH has a lot of money that's been sitting there that hasn't been spent. And that is simply not true. You can imagine, I think all of you are WASH experts, you know that infrastructure takes a really long time to build. And as you might imagine, the US government has significant and lengthy laws about contracting for infrastructure, including third-party independent evaluations by engineers at beginning, middle, and end of project. And then payment is released. And so while payment may be sitting, it is obligated to those contracts. It is not going to be dispersed and leave our treasury until those certifications come through. And so unlike a lot of other programs where there may not be infrastructure outcomes involved, specifically for this, it's in Jordan, if you're wondering. It looks big on paper, but in actuality, it's very, very slim. We have, again, kind of corrected that perception. And I think it's a good learning opportunity for folks on the Hill. There's a very nuanced process that happens on the administration side in terms of how you allocate money, where it goes, and why it may look like it's a lot, but it is not a lot. So that is kind of where we are. And then, of course, many things have happened since those two bills came out, not least of which is the conflict in the Middle East that we now have. And then, of course, the Speaker of the House resigned or was
Kicked out.
He was kicked out.
Ousted.
He was ousted. And we are, in case you're wondering, on our fourth speaker candidate now. They just started quorum call at noon. So I will pass that on. Oh, no, wait, you did want me to talk about the road forward.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And the reason I say that, and I've been working on appropriations now for 17 years, is because we don't have a Speaker of the House, and there needs to be a Speaker of the House for them to move a funding bill. The likelihood is that right now the government, including USAID's WASH organization components and all of its programs, are running on something called a continuing resolution. So it is required in the Constitution that Congress pass a budget every year. That is the budget that shall be imposed and used from the administrations. It's part of our checks and balances. Important. But at this point in time, they have not been able to come to agreement on what that budget should be in Congress. And so they've given themselves a 45-day extension. So as of November 15th, next month, we will run out of time. And the question really then is, will Congress have come together enough to give themselves another extension and keep the US government open? Or will they somehow have a massive agreement? Which I think people are hoping for, and we'll be able to say this is the final budget for the year, or will they kick the can to next year? And when doing that is just saying, okay, everything stays the same, no increases. There will be something called anomalies for some crises, but that's kind of the road ahead. So today's vote, I would say on the House floor as we speak for a speaker is a pretty significant indicator as to what can happen between now and November 15th. Luke, do you want to add on to that?
I'll wait on that.
Back down this way.
Right.
There we go. All right. So, yeah, and just so we're clear on one point, the continuing resolution is basically a thing says, we're just going to keep the spending levels in place that have been around the previous, the current year that we're in or the previous year. It's just holding the line until they can come up with an agreement what the future is going to be like. And they have not done that. And they've been running budgets this way for years now. It's really a problem. So, one point about how it might happen. So what might happen to us specifically? Again, for all the reasons Liz outlined, we don't know. Personal projection time, and that is, my guess is we will get the number back up from what the Senate did, which was a cut down to 327. Thank you. I always do that. Turn that around. 327 million. I think we can get them to move on that. There's some signs that a number of senators, Democratic and Republican, this is not just Republicans attacking at all. It's a mix. Democrats and Republicans think that number needs to go back up. And then on the House side, the House has already said, no, we want to keep it at 475. So they're cool right now. So it could get up there. My personal guess is we're not going to hit the 475.
So I got to weigh in there, though. I mean, I think this is part of an interesting conversation because, the question we're posing is Congress retreating, from WASH? Are we seeing a little bit of a pullback? And I think it's fascinating that the House, did maintain those levels. Whereas now the conversation in the Senate is, we don't think it's this low, but, they didn't maintain the line, and I think WASH's most staunch supporters have been traditionally in the Senate, probably if I were to count by numbers, right? And I think that there's probably other competing priorities that have been put out by the administration. We'll delve into that in a little bit, but I think that as they're weighing the calculus, it was very interesting that the WASH account took the biggest hit. And I think that's something, we're worried about on our side. And probably we need to look at our advocacy and see what we can do to, make sure this doesn't happen again.
One thing that we think happened, without getting into details that could cause trouble at this point, is that they got some misinformation from certain people about what was going on with the WASH money. And so we've been trying to track back, where did that misinformation come from? What is it? And how do we clear that up? So it's not like there's Chris, there's not a body, and you know this, there's not a body of opinion against WASH building in Congress itself. The problem is that there's a ceiling on how much money they can spend anymore on international affairs in general, and probably foreign aid in particular. And that's largely because of Ukraine, Israel, China, big time. So basically we're getting indirectly involved in two turning into major wars and kind of preparing for a third one. And that puts a lot of pressure on foreign assistance, on international affairs in particular. And you have a lot of members of Congress, right and left. Some of the lefties and some of the right wingers are actually on the same page on this, who don't like spending all this money on anything that relates to military and don't like spending money on certain things. So this is how this kind of happened, is the ceiling on all of this spending has come down, and they're desperately trying to find places that they can make cuts so they can adjust for other areas that they feel are high priorities. And they're all high priorities. There are famines going on in the world. There are a lot of other areas that USAID and the State Department get involved in that need more work, and climate is one of them, but we're part of climate, and that's something we need to work on more clearly with them. So there are a lot of reasons. I just want to be clear, I don't think it's because there's a rejection of water, sanitation, and hygiene. I think there's an exhaustion building in the American people with spending all this money overseas. And it's probably going to get worse.
But if that were really the case, wouldn't our WASH cut in the Senate be proportional to the other accounts?
Yes.
So that's why I'm thinking that, there is this,
we're the first one to get the hit.
Yeah, and we're
probably not the only one eventually.
Yeah, most of the counts, a lot of the counts took a hit. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the WASH took a disproportionate hit. And I think if we just, as a community say, hey, it's a clerical issue. You know, some misinformation got in there. I'm not sure if we're fully, doing it justice.
I would agree with that. And then the other thing that I would say, that I would flag for all of you, as you may or may not know, and probably again, it would be very healthy for you not to know. There was a, no, I mean, who reads this stuff except us? There was a supplemental funding request sent up from the president last
Last week.
Friday.
Yeah.
Friday afternoon to Congress. And that was specifically around Ukraine, Israel. And as John mentioned, tucked in there was a significant amount of funding for Taiwan, suggesting that they're expecting something to happen there. That is now the must move piece of legislation. Water and sanitation appears twice in that additional funding. Both accounts are related to displaced and or refugee populations. And as you can imagine, is specifically for Gaza, which is, by the way, a priority country for the United States in their WASH investments. So that is completely in alignment. But the other thing is that they're asking for a lot of transfer authority. So what does that mean? When Congress says you must spend at least this much on WASH every year, they're asking for those requirements to be waived. And that, frankly, is something I haven't seen since 9/11. So there is a significant amount of pressure for increased flexibility. And I think one of the things that all of us up here, and for those that are interested in assisting in this process, is to encourage Congress to do their constitutional duty of oversight and ask what and where, when and how is that going to happen, and for what reason? And some of that is going to, I think, be muddied into this final budget, hopefully budget deal or lack thereof within the next 6 to 8 weeks. Or next year. They have a tendency to do that. But that is the other kind of factor that I want to put out there. There's now a new sense of urgency to have these discussions because of what is happening around the world, even though it's indirectly related.
Actually, can I ask, how much are these legislators really aware of where the money is going? I mean, this is what the oversight requirement is. I mean, are they really aware of what this money is paying for? Or are these numbers really abstract to them? Because I think that's an important question. So if you're going to get buy-in, if you're going to play with funding money, then you're cutting 31%. It's just, it's 31%. It's a number.
Oh, they know that it's real stuff. I mean, even the distracted members who aren't paying attention, WASH is small. Okay, in the international affairs budget, which is really around 60 billion each year, 475 million. Now, I think it's a lot of money. As a taxpayer, that is a lot of money. That's almost $500 million from this country to international WASH. This isn't domestic. This is international. So that's pretty significant. But at the same time, so they do, I think they know that this is a big cut, but then they are making big cuts lots of places. So our cut doesn't sound like it's the end of the world, 31% from water and sanitation, which has gone up and up and up. Did you have another slide after this?
Before we segue into the next section, why don't we just open it up for audience?
Yeah, we have time for it. If you have a question that you really want to ask about what we've been talking about so far, pop it up. If it's something, we will also take some questions at the very end of the whole thing.
Oh, thank you.
So I saw a question over here.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
thank you.
It's a big tee up for the question.
This is always my favorite thing.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
But you mentioned that you talked about the foreign affairs budget kind of writ large, and you kind of threw in military ideas in there as well, but isn't that separate?
No. So foreign military financing is a part of the international affairs or foreign assistance budget.
To IAPMO or.
That would be the 3.6 billion that we give a year to Israel, the 1.2 we give to Jordan, the direct foreign military financing. It also includes things like training for judges, police officers overseas. It includes anti-narcotics. It also includes processing for your passports and visas. It includes consulate and embassy security. I mean, it is a very large operation. I think there are 107 separate accounts in foreign assistance, and they don't crosswalk. Let me be very clear. There's no this is the account for WASH. WASH is actually pulled from multiple accounts to create one big whole. So it's a very complex situation. For example, in the supplemental, yes, there's a lot of security in there, but there's also there's a request in there for evacuation of Americans as needed, those sorts of things. There's also trying to back pay on visas because they were getting people out of the region so quickly that they burned through their visa staff very, very quickly. So these are nimble and real impacts around the world. And if any of you have tried to get a visa to the United States, you know they probably need more support in that processing process. So these are kind of the trade-offs. It is a nuanced process. So within the foreign assistance budget, there's something that has historically been referred to as poverty-focused development assistance. So that would be your development, what I think we all think of as international development, and then a separate set of accounts that are humanitarian, emergency, conflict, specific, immate responses. So those are kind of where we focus.
Right. We don't want to lose you in all these accounts because this is like the tip of the iceberg of accounts. But I think that helps in that question. I hope it does, because that's a good answer.
And it gives you an idea of what they have to balance, right? Embassy security, wash.
Right. So we need to move on because we have other sections here we got to cover. One thing, let's go on to the next thing. We're going to try to do just even shorter, a little bit on some other things where we take this question on the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration commitment to WASH. Is it style or substance? And I can give you my answer, but let's work through this agenda a little bit. So first of all, the White House action plan that you heard on global water security that we asked the question about, that Chris asked the question about at the beginning. Okay, here's what that thing really did. Well, there was no money in it. So in the world of government, if there's no dollar sign attached to the thing you're suggesting, a lot of people say, oh, that's nice, and boof. Okay, but it was aspirational. There was some good stuff in it. The White House threw that together very quickly a year and a half ago. We found out about it after they already started putting it together. They did do an announcement. Kamala Harris had a press conference at the White House. That's the most important thing. And, they basically unveiled this White House Global Security Action Plan. I think it's a total of 11 pages, if I remember correctly, something like that. And it's very aspirational, and it doesn't touch on different departments of the U.S. government saying, we need to coordinate more on global water security. Here are the things we're going to look at. It's fine. But they released that report that commitment that they're going to have an action plan for the whole government, the whole U.S. government to follow. But since then, there's been, to be blunt, zero follow-up. And part of it's because of distraction of other little problems going on. And part of it's also because there was no money in it, and there's no new money going to be going for it either. So that's sort of where we are with that. And then, Liz, take the global water strategy, which you've all heard about, which is a much bigger and more serious thing, quite frankly.
Yeah, the one thing I will say on the U.S. on the White House action plan for global water security, it includes both domestic and international in it. But what we did secure was the definition of water security being experienced by people through WASH access. So it's not just about access to natural resource management, that sort of thing. It is really, truly the idea that access to water, sanitation, and hygiene is the way in which people experience water insecurity, as well as some of the agriculture and industry pulls, but that the first pillar of addressing global water security is at least ensuring and protecting current levels of access and then increasing it. And that's a big deal. This is the first time a White House has ever done a White House strategy on WASH or water. I want to be clear about that. Yeah. But again, the follow-up is a little iffy. Separate to that, but at the same time, is the every 5 years under the Water for the World Act, USAID puts together the U.S. Global Water Strategy. They call it the U.S. Global Water Strategy, and it is led by USAID, but it does have inputs from several other entities of the U.S. government. And in that strategy, that is where they are legally required to explain the criteria and the metrics that they're using for which they chose countries. They have to, by law, have those countries with highest level of need be quote unquote a priority, which is open for interpretation, and it is indeed interpreted every year. And then also lays out the priority countries and action plans for each of those countries. So that lasts for 5 years. This past one that was just put out at the end of last year, I think it was October of 2022, was special in a lot of ways. One, it for the first time really tackled climate. In the previous versions, climate was not included. It also included health, which was particularly important coming out of COVID. but something that hasn't necessarily been a tight tie-in. And then finally, it raised up sanitation. So there, you did see advancements in that strategy in particular.
Yeah, but I think that, I agree with you on the White House action plan. I mean, I think there are probably the pluses in my mind outweigh kind of the minuses of, the lack of engagement and maybe some of the, since it came from the White House, their ability to implement is a little bit harder. But it was the highest announcement we've had, and who knows how long, along my recollection, from a White House coming in on weighing in on a WASH plan and defining water security, like you were talking about, Liz. So I think that outweighs the good from that outweighs. And I liked what you just said, that it was consolidated. We focus on domestic and international WASH. We think it's a human right to water and sanitation. And so how can you talk about a human right if you're delineating who gets it? And so I like that it was a kind of a coordinated approach. I think from our point of view, one of the frustrations that we have with the kind of global water strategy is that it reads to me like it's not a global water strategy, it's a USAID water strategy. Here's what we're going to do internationally. And by the way, we reached out to 13 other agencies to see what they're currently doing on international, in the space. For me, it should be really focused on water and sanitation access globally, both domestic and, international, very cohesive, coordinated, all of government approach. And I think part of the danger with this is that, we focus a lot on that USAID water account, like how much money is going in, because that's how much money goes out to implementing partners. I think there's real opportunities for these other agencies that are spending money internationally, and we're leaving dollars on the table. And so I think that we need to be a greater advocate for water and sanitation access, among those other agencies. I mean, so I work, domestically, we work a lot with EPA, right? They have primary jurisdiction over water and sanitation in the United States. If you read their action plan in this global water strategy, it's again focused just on international, but there's no new commitments per se. It actually reads like, well, if we're approached by an NGO who's doing global WASH, we will consider, working with them to do these things. I mean, it literally is that soft of language.
And is that true of the other departments? There were like 17 government departments that participated in this. Did the others?
Yeah, some are a little bit more firm, but again, I don't think it represents any new commitments. It is just like, hey, they did an audit of the agency to say, what are we doing internationally that can tie into water? And let's just put that down on paper in the various buckets. I don't think it's not a stretch. It's not a new commitment. It's not a strategy. It's just it's more a report. At least that's my take on it.
We need to move on to would you say a couple of words quickly about the World Water Forum commitment, Liz?
Yeah, I think, and just quickly, if you went to the plenary, I think you heard a lot about UN 2023 water conference, and then the World Water Forum. So the World Water Forum is actually where the United States put forward its international commitment and then reiterated that at the 2023 water conference in March of last year at the UN. And that is a $1.2 billion over 3 years commitment. There are requirements legally that limit what any representative of the United States can say or commit to in terms of funding on global stages.
Future funding.
Yes, future funding. So I want to be very clear that the 1.2 that was committed is also already secured from Congress. And that is because that is the legal requirement for those international commitments. Presidents and others are not allowed under our Constitution to commit money that they have no legal ability to provide. And so there's some nuance there. And I think that's very different than other countries. So it leaves a little bit of a difference, I think, in comparison to what folks are hoping for.
The confusion that happened when they made this announcement, which I think was in Senegal,
Yes.
where it was
Yeah.
a year and 2 years ago.
2 years.
2 years ago. 2 years ago. A lot of people immediately in my inbox got emails. Oh, this is new money? No, this isn't new money at all. This is the same money we already have. But they're announcing it as a commitment. Now, it's good that they're doing it, but at the same time, be honest, I'll be blunt here, it was kind of misleading. And I've advised, not that they pay attention to me, but I've advised them in the future, don't do this anymore. Because this doesn't help us in our advocacy to be on your side to help you get the funding out of Congress for these programs. When you kind of mislead people on the level of commitment, it doesn't build good faith, it doesn't build trust in what we're doing. So this is something we didn't like. Okay.
Don,
History of,
Don,
you need to.
I want to jump in very quickly. You know, in all of these documents, you know, they're great, and they set a lot of great commitments, a lot of great goals that the U.S. is going to undertake. But one thing where there is really not a lot is building the legal and policy infrastructure for these countries.
Yes.
It's very much focused on developing infrastructure, not on developing that legal infrastructure, you know, building judges, building a legal system that you need in order for a lot of these things to be protected over time and for a lot of these systems to work. You know, we in the United States, as an example, Clean Water Act really helped us to move forward from a history of pollution and from dirty water in most of the nation's rivers. And yet, even though we have that experience in this country, we're not thinking to invest the same way in these other countries. And that's a really, really big miss for these. And it was something that the WASH community did put in front of the White House when they were talking about the action plan. And there's talk about enabling environments and regulatory stuff, but there's nothing about really building that rule of law. And that's a really, really big lacuna that they left open.
All right, Chris, we don't have time for the next slide, so we have to skip over that one, which was about the sort of a short history of administration requests on WASH, but we're not going to get into that. We kind of covered that before. So let's just move to the next section here, the section that we see. This is international versus domestic WASH, and Chris and Luke, can you kind of like start to hold forth on that for a few minutes? We got about, we got some time.
Yeah, you know, this is obviously an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I see across the room a number of organizations that, you know, work in the domestic space and have been great leaders, you know, in helping to bring together the community. You know, in high income countries, there is a water and sanitation access problem, you know, and that includes the United States. And I just don't think I'm not comfortable with the approach the United States is currently taking, that one, it's international versus domestic. Like, I think when we talk, again, going back to the global water strategy, in our water strategy needs to incorporate kind of both elements. It needs to be in all of the government, you know, kind of approach. And I think we'll bring more resources to bear to address, you know, things like law and policy, you know, by taking that approach. But even in Congress, you know, sometimes I think there's a worry that if you bring in domestic issues, it will somehow overshadow this, you know, enormous need internationally. And I don't feel that is the case. I feel it gives actually more coverage and gives more, you know, credence to the work that, you know, members of Congress and even the administration can do. Because it's one thing for a member of Congress to say, hey, I'm out fighting for, you know, clean drinking water and helping populations around the world, but I'm also doing it in my backyard and getting my constituents that don't have access to it too. And so I just think that we need to incorporate that a little bit better.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things in the United States in particular is we have really started to focus on these equity issues really because of the pandemic. You know, the fact that people couldn't pay their bills, couldn't pay water bills as they were going up, utilities were struggling, at least nominally, to then cover their bills. This is something that really led to a lot of action at the domestic level, although I think we're starting to see that tail off a little bit of trying to build some of that funding in to make sure that people didn't lose access to water. But it's also, in some ways, it's created a greater knowledge and awareness of the fact that we don't have everything figured out here. And I think that's been a big shift in many ways. And I think you see Congress trying to take more action to finance some of those efforts domestically, and even maybe having to face down the fact that some of the things that we're funding abroad are actually things we need to be funding here as well. In a way that, you know, when it comes to equity and making sure that people have access and are actually being connected, that we haven't really thought about for a very long time and in a systemic way. So I think that's actually one of the biggest things that's come out of the pandemic for at least for domestic WASH, is this need to fill that gap. Now, the problem is maintaining the political will when the pandemic is over. And that's been kind of the struggle. You know, we had some programs domestically that were, you know, intended to really, again, fill that equity gap. And the funding is on the table. You know, will it be there? Will it be there? What will it look like? We don't know. We don't know if that's going to exist in a few years. And that's really a big issue. And a bigger issue is also that a lot of this stuff, at least domestically, is pushed to the domestic level. So it's not necessarily on the national mind. And so I think that's partly why you see this disconnect, is that this idea of international affairs is federal, it's Congress, whereas domestic issues are, you know, that's the states and that's the local, that's the cities. And that dichotomy, I think, has led to a bit of a neglect. And I think that's changing now, particularly as cities and states are going to start struggling in funding areas in the near future. But it also means that now you're going to have these two competing ideas in Congress. And they're going to say, well, we need to fund our domestic wash as well as our international wash, and which one is going to be a priority for us.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add on that is that I just think there's also some great technical exchange that could take place. There are things that have been figured out by the implementing organizations globally that we have the same issues here in populations, in the United States, where we need to look at how we do cluster systems or small systems. You look at even how the household and decentralized, systems. There are things that have been going on for years, like in Africa, that why aren't we, taking that same approach to getting in some of our most rural populations, at least water access now.
You guys want to make a couple more points, and we could ask for some questions at this point, because you might have a few. And I see one over there, so I see two. Who else? Any more? We can take up to three. That's it.
Let's do her first, since Catherine's patiently waiting over there with the mic.
No, I know. I can do this. All right. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you. But since you referenced the UN Water Conference, and I was just interested in knowing, the US Secretary of State was there at that Holland, and she made a commitment on behalf of the US government, and she also talked about the importance of indigenous knowledge and about focusing on certain states more than others, and there's obviously good reason to do that. And I was wondering, since March, has that kind of changed the way the government is thinking about it, or is it more or less? Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the biggest change from my perspective, and welcome the thoughts of others, is actually just been the infusion from the infrastructure funding.
Yeah.
It's given the agencies a little bit more opportunities to address, some of the issues in these communities. However, when you look at the money that was spent towards water, I mean, there's a huge chunk that went towards like lead service lines, which is it's an important issue. A lot of it, went towards, bigger utility, the backlog of infrastructure challenges that we have. Very few dollars are going towards first time access or, addressing kind of the wash access as we would refer to it here in this room. And I'm even more concerned beyond that. Once that infrastructure bubble funding, goes through, the programs that we're left with, I can point to just a couple of them. There's a program at USDA that gets a handful of million, a few $1 million to help out with rural, populations. There's a program that's been authorized at EPA to deal with this. It's never received funding. So, I mean, there's really not that many opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing I would point out is, yes, Greenfield, our UN ambassador for the United States was really, it was a big commitment. It was $49 billion was what the US put forward at the UN Water Conference. Only 2 billion of that is international. The rest of it is domestic infrastructure that they had already.
I mean, that's not a small
But I want to be clear about when we're talking about global wash, the proportionality of that commitment. And yes, it is infrastructure funding. I would say the other thing that is difficult, no, it hasn't changed much of the conversation, but what I am very keenly watching going forward, we've seen this in several pieces of legislation where Congress has attempted to come to the table and build a budget. And one of the things that they're offering for cuts is that infrastructure funding. And those bills have not gone forward because everything has either stalled or failed. But you consistently see what they call rescissions, basically take backs of money. Give me back the money. And it's specifically around some of the local loans in the United States to local municipalities and water infrastructure. And that is something that I think everyone needs to be aware of, that there are kind of less straightforward ways in which the money and the commitments itself can be taken back. And it's not just a straightforward, it can be chipped away at it for quite a while.
Sir, you have a question.
I think I can talk loud.
It's for the
It's a recording.
We have a recording going on, so
You have to preserve this wisdom for posterity. So.
it's for my legal protection.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm R.C. Crawford. I come from a family with like 100 years of well drilling, and I won the Patent for Humanity Award for a method of heating water for people. I've drilled, 28 wells in the U.S. for free. And I may be one of your problems. I complain to the Congress, and I complain to people generally about USAID, because in fact, I've exchanged letters with your Inspector General. And I've had a bill passed Also, by my Republican legislator that indicates that y'all are supposed to support American citizens that have projects that USAID could do. And I'm sure this attorney over here may know what bill number it is, but I don't have it right now.
No, he probably doesn't know. No.
Yeah.
You said legal protection.
That's the way the government works. So what I'd like to do in 2015, I started getting in touch with y'all, and I haven't had a yes. Shake your head if you want.
No, I mean, who's the you in this sentence?
USAID.
USAID.
Okay, we're not.
None of
USAID.
us are.
Unfortunately, none of us are USAID.
But wait,
Yeah, with USAID and almost every branch of the government that has anything to do with water, I've contacted. I've contacted people in just about every state, including the state of Texas. But there are inventions that are out there, and you're wasting money, you're wasting taxpayers' dollars. I can see why they cut it with this, all of the bad press that's out there. So I would say a good way to get ahead is to clean up everything, and when you abuse citizens, then you're going to have a problem.
so let me understand very briefly here because we want to move on. But the nub of your question was that you feel that that government agencies, U.S. government agencies, including international ones working on international work, not just USAID, are ignoring the ability, the capacity of perhaps some American companies, American individuals to sell products or services that
Yeah.
the government could use in its programs. Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Bill,
Yeah,
it's
please, Chris.
enough of a problem where the U.S. Congress voted for a bill. And so, yeah, I mean, you can laugh about it or whatever you want to do, but it's not a good thing.
Well, and listen, I agree with you. We represent, work closely with industry. There is a challenge, in getting new innovation and new technologies and reliable technologies, into the right hands at the right moment. And that's something that, we're anxiously working, towards. And quite frankly, that's one of the challenges when we talk about some of these big bills is that, our perspective is, government has a role to play in building infrastructure and making sure that populations have clean water and sanitation. And industry is the partner in carrying that out. And so, how we go about that needs to be improved. And when you look at some of those big bills, there is a lot of waste, in those bills. And so, but it is difficult parsing out between, the wheat from the tares, right? What really makes sense and, where are we just adding, surplus? But I think your point's well made. It's something that we need to give a hard look at is how do we get, better technology and cheaper technologies, importantly, into these projects into the right hands.
Yeah, and I'll add to that.
Go ahead, Lou.
I'll add to that, part of it is also, again, the legal infrastructure. In order to get products out of the US and into other countries, you need to have the ability to get them into those other countries, whether you need to have standards that allow those to cross borders, you have laws that require them to be implemented. These are all things that need to be done at the legal level. So if you don't have that infrastructure at the legal level, then then it's going to be a barrier potentially for US products leaving the country being exported. And that could be a problem. No, and I will say again, just to clarify, none of us are in the government. We don't work for the government. We work with
at the
people who
By
are the government.
design.
We're critiquing the government right now. And so it's, but generally speaking, a lot of what we're saying is there's still a lot of work to be done, including trying to find avenues for new technologies and innovation across every stage of WASH.
Yeah, that's true. And I do think we need to move on to another section here, but I just want to say one thing. I'm tempted to dwell on this, no pun intended, dwell on this a little longer, because I personally have talked with you over the years about this. Whether or not there is an attitude among some people in the U.S. government, certain places, that is not, when American businesses, for example, come along, there's kind of like, oh, we're not going to help you, we have a higher mission, we're not going to deal with that sort of thing. I'm going to get into it because it gets to be complicated, and this is all very subjective, it's all very second, third hand kind of stuff, but that has been discussed, and I think it maybe gets overstated by different people. But it is a bit of a problem inside USAID, but there are other problems within USAID. And just so you're clear on something about our relationship here, We are constantly arguing, even though we like a lot of the people, including the water team in particular at USAID, we're very good. We work with them all the time, and they've done some fantastic work. The global water strategy overall that they created with our input a year ago is a darn good strategic plan for the most part, and it's good. But USAID is not the most transparent organization in the world. And as any of you who have worked on any USAID grant applications or contracts, you know, it is a high bar to get through all those requirements. And yes, this is so hard to do. But that's partly there because their number one job, arguably number two job, is to make sure, try to make sure the money is not misspent. That's why there's so many checks and balances. There's so much accountability. So on that part of the process, it's inherently going to have its inefficiencies. And you will get people, especially at the middle level of the agency and at the missions and countries around the world, who are really preoccupied with crossing those T's, dotting those I's, and they kind of lose sight of the big picture. We're the advocates who advocate to Congress and the administration to prioritize more water and sanitation spending, better programming, more accountability. We don't just work on the numbers, we also work on the language. What are they trying to do? What are the obligations? How are they going to report this out? And I just say it's frustrating at times, even though we're dealing with people who are pretty much on the same page we are. They're part of a massive bureaucracy, and there's a lot of cover your rear end stuff going on too. And that's just sometimes we just have to deal with this. This is part and parcel of dealing with large government agencies, especially the largest government agency in the world when it comes to funding water, sanitation, and hygiene. That is USAID. Go ahead, Liz, let's wrap up on this point.
The one thing, don't ever apologize for reaching out to a member of Congress. That is the way this is supposed to work. Just
Well, it takes more than one time.
It takes a lot.
It
does.
I worked on so many issues where we went at it for years and years, and finally we had success. I worked on one piece of legislation where we were told we weren't going to win at all. It took us 7 years, but we wound up winning.
Yeah, the average time is about 10 years for us before we can get from introduction to it actually becoming a law.
Right.
But the other thing I would point out in terms of these funding discussions, and just to tie this in, the innovation piece. So you're not alone, and you're right. There are actually two bills with this, and there's an annual statute that is required that U.S. business, and particularly small and medium enterprises, are included and elevated in terms of external international work. It's also very, very big in food security and agriculture, as you might imagine. And one of the things that we face head on with the WASH piece in particular is they don't have the standing or the funding from Congress to have an innovation lab. Other parts of USA, yes, DIV is there. DIV does not consider WASH to be a high priority. And that is and that's the development initiative for anyone who venture initiative. And so it is a little bit one of the things that we are constantly pushing for in terms of additional funding is it's not about need. It's also about there needs to be a higher level of rigor and infrastructure based within the agency to address these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. So we get 475, food security and agriculture gets over $1 billion. And they have their own standalone in-house working with U.S. land grant universities and patents just on that, because part of that is that they have the staff to do it, whereas the water team doesn't. And those connections are missed. So I want to be clear about a couple things here. One is, yes, we push for more money, and yes, it is for need, and yes, it is because the world is on fire. But two, we are missing innovative opportunities because this is not seen as a priority area of investment within WASH. And don't ever apologize for reaching out to your member of Congress. It's their job to respond to you.
That's what we do. So I just say, I'm going to move on to another section, but I appreciate the question. I'm glad you asked it. I appreciate that question. We're going to move on to another piece here. I don't think we have a slide to go with this, Chris, but basically I'm at number 4 here, the 10th anniversary of the Water for the World Act.
How do we hold administration accountable?
Oh, yeah, that's it. Okay, great. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to talk for a real quick minute about the Water for the World Act and the fact that it is going to be next year, the 10th anniversary of the act being signed into law by President Obama. And then we'll move on to another part about how it is living up to the act and how the USAID is focusing on focusing its dollars in the future, we think. Okay, so this is a time some of us, me in particular, but some others too, have been talking for the last few years with some members of Congress. It's time for them to have an oversight hearing. And if you've watched any politics or congressional stuff at all, you know what I'm talking about. It's a hearing. Sometimes these oversight hearings are really good. They really uncover some things. They really advance the public interest. And as you know, depending on who's running the hearing, sometimes they are absolutely insane and are a waste of public time and money. But sometimes they're really good. This legislation, the Water for the World Act, passed in 2014, is way overdue for an oversight hearing by Congress. And that would be the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and or the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So we are saying this is time for a hearing where we look at some of the problems that we see in the administration's handling and the USAID's implementation of the Water for the World Act. And again, it's not all antagonistic. It's not all critical. There's a lot of good stuff, but that's sort of our strategy going forward. It's not just every year saying we need more money, we need more money, we need more. Well, everybody says they need more money, and sometimes they actually do. So, but we have to really see how much progress have they made on this extremely bipartisan bill that was passed by the House and Senate in 2014. And that's going to be an opportunity for us next year, working with an even broader network of advocates, I hope, to really get Congress to ask some key questions that have been kicking the can down the road. And this will get some of the problems we've been talking about. Liz, why don't you talk about the next piece of this, which is.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to point out was USAID does provide an annual report. And they provide an annual report on where and when and how and varying levels of statistics of where their funding is going, what is being invested in by geography. That's actually not legally required. So they are doing that. There was a request for it, but they are actually, like, for WASH, they're going above and beyond what's a legal requirement. And I point that out because as we're looking at a 10-year anniversary, if one thing has been made clear in the last decade, it is that unless it is in statute and it is legally required, it is at the pleasure of the administration of if it will exist. And sometimes some administrations are really, really transparent and others less so. And that's just a reality. But I did want to praise the fact that those reports are out there. If you ever want to know how much money is going where, and you're going to see very large dollar amounts because it also includes humanitarian. So distribution of wash kits is included in that. So not necessarily some of the development pieces that we're looking at. But I also think in terms of oversight, yes, there's the hearing, potential and possibility. There's this anniversary moment, but there are smaller things that we can do within statute now. So for example, on these budget bills, reporting requirements of if anything gets transferred out of WASH for something else, we should have visibility in that. Those are the sorts of things that Congress can put in now, which still allows for transparency, accountability, even during dire times. So these are the sorts of things that we look at on a day-to-day of how do we increase that visibility, not just for members of Congress, but also for the public.
All right, now we are at 1:13, I think. Yes, we are. So we want to allow some time for any more questions. Chris, did you want to add a point? That's where we had on the original plan, looking at the role of other federal agencies. Do you think
the only thing I'll add else to that, there is a kind of a coalition that's forming focused on domestic wash to help elevate that within the issue. I know there's team Dig Deeps around. Raise your hand, guys. It's a coalition called Vessel. If you're focusing on domestic wash at all here in the US, or curious to know what they're going to be doing to help elevate those issues, I encourage you to come talk to them. But yeah, works.
Luke, I want to make sure you get a chance to say one last thing about your massive bureaucracy of an organization you work for.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, a big part of what I've said is that the legal infrastructure needs to lead. It's when you have laws that say do something, that actually forces the government to act. And I think we've heard that in hearing about some of the commitments the administration has made in the Water for the World Act. And so it's important that when we think about foreign aid, to also think about that as a big part of what we're doing. How do we develop laws inside of these countries so that action actually happens? How do we get USA to invest in that? How do we get experts from here and experts from other countries to work together? And that's something that my organization does. And so it's something that we're always looking for opportunities to do because it is such a critical part. So, even if you say, well, the law doesn't matter in my country or, know, we only use policies. I mean, you remember how much we've talked about what the law requires here and how much all the other policy stuff is a little squiffy. That's where you need the laws. It is to fill some of those gaps and to concretize some of those really important principles into what a country or what a state or what a nation is doing.
And Luke, I just want to, before we go on to any quick questions, is Luke's organization stands by to help individual organizations and has done this in a number of countries in Africa, and I think maybe Latin America elsewhere, where you've gone in and consulted, given advice to organizations about how they can maybe argue for changes in the law, get the governments where they're dealing with to follow the law. That's what they do. They advise other organizations and on their work in various countries where they're trying to develop a better water legal structure. So if you need their help, you should call them. They will give you help. Okay. See, I just did that for you.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay. Now, real quick. All right. Questions. Humans, please raise your hands if you have questions. We're at close to the end. We're almost at the end, but please, any questions?
We're over.
Well, we're over a minute, but that won't kill anybody here.
Spoken like someone with the microphone.
Yeah, yes, sir. Go ahead. Just say please, so we know who you are and appreciate that.
University of Michigan. I'm really curious about the intermediate consequences of big funding cuts like this. I think like the funding numbers are just abstract and not very high level. On the ground, we know that people who need water sanitation services aren't going to get it. But what are like the real resources and companies that are going to suffer consequences? Is it mostly domestic companies? Is that where like most of the money gets spent and our business is shutting down? Is it in-country businesses that aren't being created or generated? Like where's the workforce suffering?
Real quick thing, Liz can, or anybody can comment on this. Say USAID's money, most of it goes out the door. It goes out in the countries. It doesn't stay here. Now, there are American companies obviously involved in providing various products and services, of course, quite a good chunk. But at the same time, the cut that we're talking about goes into effect, it'll have a massive effect throughout everything that relates to water and sanitation, wherever it is on the international programs. That's USAID. Liz, sorry.
This is it's a great question. I think, so I know probably too much about this. So I'm going to try and keep it high level. In each year's appropriations bill or funding bill, not only do we have these directives that say this minimum amount has to be spent on WASH, we also have a minimum amount of all of the amount of funding in this bill has to go towards Jordan. A minimum amount has to go towards Israel. A minimum amount has to go towards Tanzania. Each one has what we call a directive. Because there are these directives over directives, if the number goes down, the directives for those countries still have to be met. They have to be met somehow. And right now they're being met partially, for the case of Jordan, largely out of the WASH bilateral account, that WASH funding pipeline. So the question will quickly become for the United States government, and this is why we think perhaps there was a clerical error, do you reduce the amount of money that you are giving to the Jordanian government for their WASH infrastructure, or do you break the law and not provide the minimum requirement to African countries who have the highest need? These are the trade-offs. And as John mentioned, it is nuanced. It's not just about the USAID implementers. If you work on the ground, you probably know what AID is doing in the country, or at least their grantees, and you adjust your own response. So even if you're not directly impacted as an implementer of USAID, or as some of the particular localization efforts at the agency are moving forward, some of the local entities, you are impacted, because the question is, it creates a tremendous amount of insecurity over what does this mean for next year's payment? What does this mean for next year's proposal?
And to be clear, next year in this language is FY24, the federal FY24. That's what we're talking about. FY23, which we're still in, well, we're not still in technically, but anyway, that's the money we have at the moment. That is even under some threat, because as we talked about before, there's this thing called rescissions where Congress can go back and cut money that they've already given. So we have a big problem now, which is there's an undercurrent, there's a sense of emergency at USAID and the State Department and other agencies. Obviously, a sense of emergency because what is really happening on the planet, but also a sense of emergency about how do we get the money when Congress is telling us that we're at the limit. We're pretty much at where we want to go. So that answers the question in the sense that if there's a 31% cut, which I don't think there will be, I think we'll get up. But if there's anything like a big cut, it's going to be felt in all the water sanitation related programs in every country where there's a program or going to be a program in the next year or 2 or 3. If you are a contractor or grantee or potential contractor or grantee, that is definitely going to have an impact on that mission's ability to even talk to you about designing a program. Because they're also going to have staff cuts. Whereas this this is the bad part. And going back about USAID and not doing it, that staff has been whipsawed because of ideology in Congress over the years, has been whipsawed with massive cuts, demoralization of staff, people leaving because they can't depend on the job being there anymore. And then all of a sudden a different administration comes along, beefs up the agency, starts hiring talented people, trying to retain talented people to stay in the missions, to stay with the programs at headquarters. And then 2 or 3 years later, another administration comes along and whacks them. This seesaw, which is problem of the whole damn government, frankly, this seesaw effect has had a real big structural and emotional impact on the people at USAID. So,
and on that happy note,
sorry, if you have any other questions, someone's to be hanging around. And if you want to talk any more, find out more, just talk to the Millennium Water Alliance, WaterAid, IAPMO, and the Center for Water Security and Cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yeah, excuse me. Could you all make sure you
Please take your plates. Take your plates with you.
Glass.
So I'll get. Yeah. And I said, here, yeah. I usually say that. I forgot to.
All right, do we have another slide after that?
No, what? Then it's Q&A.
Thanks for that. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
You're like, you're really messed up here.
Why was it happening?
Yeah,
No, you sound like you're from Arkansas. Like, no.
Thanks. Thanks for your work. I'll give you my card.
Well, I'm trying to start doing this now as well. I was trying to.
So we're an industry association that represents the plumbing industry.
Oh, okay. Well,